Hello and welcome to a video on solving quadratic equations graphically. And in this video, all we're going to be using to solve our quadratic equations is the graph that's been either provided or one which we're going to create. So if we take a look at this first question here, this is the graph of the equation y equals x squared minus x minus 12. And we want to solve this quadratic equation. So when we're trying to solve a quadratic equation, all we're doing is identifying the roots of that equation. And when I mean roots, we're looking at where does it cross the x-axis. Okay, so it crosses the x-axis at this point and this point. So these are our solutions. So our solutions will be x equals negative 3 and this point here, x equals 4. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video and have a go at solving these two quadratic equations yourself, and you only need to use the information provided on the graphs. Okay, so I'm assuming you've paused the video now and had a go, so let's go through these. So when we're solving these equations, we just need to identify where it crosses the x-axis, or where this line crosses the x-axis, and it crosses at this point here and this point here. So what are those points? Well, the x values, it's halfway between 0 and negative 1. So the first solution is x equals negative 0.5. And the second solution, it is on 2. So x equals 2. Now the second one, it crosses the x-axis at this point here and this point here. And it is quite small, so don't worry if we don't get it quite right. But I think this point is on this line here. And each of these small squares is 0.25, because if we're starting at negative 1, that's negative 1.25, negative 1.5, negative 1.75, and negative 2. So that is negative 1.75. And our second solution, well, that is just on negative 1. So x equals negative 1. Okay, so we're going to move on slightly now. So now here we haven't been given our graph. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to fill in the table of values and plot our equation on the graph here. And then using this graph, we can then calculate the solutions. And some of this has already been done for us. So if we start on the left-hand side, all we're going to be doing is substituting our x value into our equation. So the first one, we're going to substitute negative 3. So it's negative 3 squared. Subtract negative 3 minus 5. So negative 3 squared, that gives us positive 9. And then if we subtract negative 3, that's the same as adding 3. So we've got 9 plus 3, which is 12. 12 minus 5, that gives us 7. So the next one is negative 2. So we've got negative 2 squared. Subtract negative 2. Subtract 5. Negative 2 squared is 4. And then this is plus 2. So 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 minus 5 gives us 1. So negative 1's already been done for us. So the next one is 0. So we've got 0 squared, subtract 0, subtract 5. Well, this is just 0. All of this is 0. And then we've just got minus 5, which is just minus 5. So then we've got 1 squared, and we're going to subtract 1 minus 5. 1 squared is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 subtract 5 is also negative 5. And finally, we've got 2, so that's 2 squared, subtract 2 minus 5. So this is 4. 4 minus 2 is 2. 2 subtract 5 gives us negative 3. So now we're going to plot these coordinates on our graph. So now I've plotted the coordinates on our graph. Now we just need to connect these points with a smooth curve. And I'm going to try and be as accurate as possible, but we will only be finding estimates to the solution, so don't worry if it's not perfect. So now we've plotted our graph, we need to use the graph to find estimates of the solutions to the equation x squared minus x minus 5 equals 0. So where does this line equal 0, or where does it cross the x-axis? Well, it crosses the x-axis at this point here and this point here. So we just need to identify the coordinates of these 2 points. Well, this one here, what is the x value? Well, if this is negative 1 and that's negative 2, this will be negative 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, it looks like it's negative 1.8. And finally, this one here, this is x equals 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8. And these are our solutions. And these values, these are only estimates. So if you get something around these values, then you can be happy. So we're going to finish this video by using what we know about quadratic equations and their corresponding graphs to solve each of these quadratic equations. And notice how they're all very similar, they just slightly vary in one aspect. So this is the graph of the equation y equals x squared plus 2x minus 1. First of all, we want to solve the equation x squared plus 2x minus 1 equals 0. So this is our bog standard version, so we're just looking at where does it cross the x-axis, or where is the y value 0. So it crosses the x-axis at this point here and this point here, and the x-coordinates of that solution are x equals, so that looks like it's about negative 2.5, and our other solution is, that looks like it's about 0.3. So if we have a look at this one here, notice how this part of our expression is exactly the same as this part, and it's exactly the same as what we've drawn on our graph. The only difference is here. Before we were looking at where does the line cross the x-axis, or the point y equals 0. Here we're looking at where does the curve cross the point y equals negative 2. So if we have a look at our graph and go down to negative 2, what is the x-coordinate when y equals negative 2? Well, it's this point here, and in fact this is the only point. So here we've only got one solution, so the solution is x equals negative 1. Now if we look at part C, again this part of our quadratic expression is exactly the same, but we're just looking at where does the line cross the point y equals 2. So this time if we go up to y equals 2 and we go along, notice how it crosses the line y equals 2 at that point and that point there. So again we've got two solutions, and those solutions are x equals negative 3 and x equals 1. So notice how with all three of these we've just used our graph to identify the points at which y equals different values. So the first one was where y equals 0, or which is just the x-axis. The second one was y equals negative 2. And the third one was where does y equal positive 2. Now the last one, it's slightly different. If we have a look at this, it's almost the same, but instead of negative 1, we've got plus 7. So what we can do is we can manipulate this equation slightly so that we do get negative 1 here. So how can we get negative 1 here? Well, if we subtract 8 from both sides, that will give us negative 1 here. What we'll be left with is x squared plus 2x, and then 7 minus 8, that gives us negative 1, equals 8 subtract 8, that gives us 0. So notice how now we've got exactly the same quadratic expression as what we had for each of these. And here it equals 0. So again, this is exactly the same as our first question. So our solutions are x equals negative 2.5 and x equals 0.3. So hopefully that gave you a bit of an understanding of how we solve quadratic equations graphically. So what we've done is we've just used the equation that was given to us and its corresponding graph, and then on that we've just identified the different points at which y equal different values. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks for watching. Take care.